We are here at DreamHack Atlanta with Jace, or Dr. J. We're not going to attempt the name. Jinkaniki something. I don't know. But he is here casting Hearthstone. We are on the finals day. How has this day been going for you?
It's been going pretty well. There's been a lot of storylines developed throughout the entire day. There's a lot of players that haven't gotten quite the notoriety they deserve, and there's been some players that have been newer to the scene, and they're just trying to get their first ever experience in a DreamHack tournament.
All right, well, you have some experience at DreamHack tournaments, especially DreamHack Atlanta. What happened when you were here last year?
Last year, I may have gotten pretty fortunate and ended up winning DreamHack Atlanta. I'm the 2017 champion, so it's kind of surreal to come back and get to cast the event. It's very special and near and dear to my heart, so I'm really glad to be here.
All right, and so this casting thing's kind of a recent adjustment. I understand you had your sort of breakout event. He was spontaneously asked to cast in DreamHack Austin, right? What happened there?
So the funny story about that is I had full intentions of going to DreamHack Austin to compete as a player, because typically I hadn't been in the DreamHack casting scene just quite yet. I had done some smaller events such as the TESPA Collegiate Finals for Hearthstone, or just casting some other HCT tour stops. But with Austin, one of the casters actually couldn't make it due to various reasons. And when I landed on my flight, I got a message from Robert, one of the directors, and said, I know you're competing, but do you mind dropping out and maybe go buying some nice shirts, that way you can cast this turn? I was like, yeah, that sounds like fun. I'd love to do that. So that's actually the funny story about how I got to cast Austin, and ever since then I've been casting all of them, from the Americas at least.
So from player to caster, and now you're here at DreamHack Atlanta casting the grand finals. Is casting what you expected? Is it you obviously played for a while. How has that transition been?
So it's been a little bit difficult. As being a player, you kind of look at things at a more analytical perspective, whereas I think from being a caster's point of view, you kind of want to tell a story. You kind of want to keep people engaged. You want to make sure that they're coming back to the stream to watch their favorite players over and over. So it was really hard to try and tone down how much analysis I could put into the game, especially when I'm trying to tell that story.
And so as a player, you obviously, have a lot of this deep analysis and knowledge and everything. And we were talking before this about there's this one example of a card like a Luneth, where it's a card that even though you can't use it at first, you're still going to hold on to for a while. And for a lot of maybe less experienced players, when they see, they're getting to the, to the end and they're not getting this card and they really need this card to keep their deck going, they just blame RNG. Does Hearthstone have as much RNG as people like to yell at it for? Or is there a lot of strategy that kind of the professional players doing that maybe the casual players don't realize?
So I think there's a whole lot more strategy than people like to entail when watching the game. A lot of times you'll see some crazy, wacky stuff happening and you're like, oh, what's this going on? But a lot of players set themselves up for things like that to occur. For instance, in the case of a Luneth, a lot of times a Luneth is presented in the mulligan. And a Luneth is a very powerful card in a lot of matchups, but some players, they don't necessarily see it as a 1-drop or a 2-drop, and maybe they don't have that 1-drop or 2-drop, so they say, I can just get rid of this and I'll find it later on. But when they don't find it later on, that's kind of when they're screwed. They really need to have that gas to keep going in the game, especially some control matchups. And there's a lot of scenarios where we see some of the most consistent players just doing well after, there was an example of Just Sayin has been on a tear recently and has won basically 3 tournaments in a row. He won WSG, he won DreamHack Montreal, and he's going to Worlds now because he made top 4 in HCT. So it's crazy to see this level of consistency from the players that, maybe the casual audience doesn't necessarily understand as much.
So it's not all RNG. There is a lot you can do, strategy-wise.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of strategy-wise where you keep cards in the mulligan maybe you necessarily wouldn't keep. Understanding matchups is very important. There's a lot of different classes and a lot of different decks in Hearthstone where if say, Paladin versus Druid better than most people, you can use that to your advantage, whereas most players, may not necessarily understand that matchup as well.
All right, and so if we take a little break from Hearthstone, this is very timely with the release of Artifact dropping quite soon. Have you been paying attention to Artifact and Magic the Gathering Arena, I believe, are the kind of the 2 big card games that are coming out?
Yeah, so those are the 2 ones that I've taken note of. As for their stance, I believe the Artifact NDA just dropped last night, if I remember correctly. I think the community's reaction to it is a little bit mixed. I'm just going to kind of wait and see how it pans out. Don't really want to make too many comments on that. Obviously, I do love and enjoy Hearthstone, but it's great to see some kind of competition come into the forefront because it does make both games better. I do believe firmly in competition makes things better. So I'm just going to wait to see how it turns out.
And do you think we'll see a lot of Hearthstone players making a switch or even potentially doing both? Is there the time in the day to play two games and understand two competitive scenes that well, or do people have to make the choice?
So that's a very difficult one. I don't think you can compare like the esport Hearthstone to other games. For instance, if you play CSGO, it's much more difficult to transition from something like that over to Overwatch. But for card games, it's a little bit easier because a lot of card games have very similar mechanics and very similar ideology. The hardest part for trying to balance multiple games is understanding the full meta. So if you try and delve into something like Artifact and Hearthstone, you may understand the metas, but you may not deeply understand the metas. Whereas if you choose one, you can deeply understand the meta and perform better. So I think some players will probably try and pick up both, try and understand both, but it's a difficult question to kind of answer.
All right, so we'll have to see. But for now, we have some amazing Hearthstone here at DreamHack. Thank you for taking time out of your busy casting schedule to kind of give us this little peek into your life.
I'm glad. Thank you very much for having me.